Pericles, father of the Golden Age. The statesman who transformed democracy into destiny. Introduction: the man who made Athens eternal. In the annals of human history, few individuals have left such an indelible mark on civilization as Pericles, son of Xanthippus, the towering figure who dominated Athenian politics for more than 3 decades and transformed Athens from a powerful city-state into the cultural and intellectual epicenter of the ancient world. Born around 495 BCE into one of Athens's most distinguished aristocratic families, Pericles would paradoxically become democracy's greatest champion, proving that nobility of birth and democratic conviction were not mutually exclusive, but could combine to create transformative leadership. The period of Pericles' ascendancy, roughly from 461 to 429 BCE, is universally known as the Golden Age of Athens, or the Age of Pericles, a time when Athenian democracy reached its fullest expression, when the Parthenon rose gleaming on the Acropolis, when Sophocles and Euripides wrote their immortal tragedies, when Socrates walked the streets engaging citizens in philosophical dialogue, and when Athens became, in Pericles' own famous words, the school of Hellas, the teacher of Greece, and by extension of Western civilization itself. What made Pericles extraordinary was not merely his political skill, though he possessed that in abundance. It was not solely his oratorical brilliance, though ancient sources unanimously praised his ability to sway audiences with reasoned argument rather than emotional manipulation. Rather, it was his profound philosophical vision, his deep conviction that democracy was not just a system of government, but a way of life, that Athens' greatness lay not in military might or material wealth, but in the quality and character of its citizens, and that a truly great civilization must excel not only in power, but in culture, art, philosophy, and the pursuit of human excellence in all its forms. This was revolutionary thinking. In an age when most societies were ruled by kings, tyrants, or narrow oligarchies, when political power was typically concentrated in the hands of the wealthy few, when the masses were excluded from governance and regarded as unfit to participate in important decisions, Pericles articulated and implemented a radically different vision. He believed and dedicated his life to proving that ordinary citizens, when educated, engaged, and empowered, could govern themselves wisely, make sound collective decisions, and create a civilization of unparalleled achievement. The making of a democratic aristocrat, 495-462 BCE. Nudged birth into privilege and destiny. Pericles was born around 495 BCE into the very apex of Athenian society. His father, Xanthippus, was a distinguished general who had commanded Athenian forces at the decisive Battle of Mycale in 479 BCE, where the allied Greek fleet destroyed the remnants of the Persian navy, effectively ending Persia's threat to mainland Greece. His mother, Agariste, came from perhaps the most illustrious family in Athens, the Alcmaeonids, a clan that had shaped Athenian politics for generations. The Alcmaeonid family could claim Cleisthenes among its ancestors, the very statesman who in 508-507 BCE had established the fundamental structures of Athenian democracy. This was no minor heritage. Cleisthenes had reorganized Athenian society, breaking the power of aristocratic clans by creating new political units, diemes, based on residence rather than kinship, establishing the Council of 500 as democracy's administrative backbone, and creating the institution of ostracism as a safeguard against tyranny. Pericles literally inherited the legacy of democracy's founding. Yet the Alcmaeonids also bore a curse, literally. The family was believed to be under divine pollution, miasma, for the killing of suppliants at an altar generations earlier, during the attempted coup by Cylon around 632 BCE. This curse would be weaponized against Pericles by his political enemies throughout his career, invoked whenever they needed to undermine his authority through religious scruple. That Pericles overcame this hereditary stain to achieve supreme political influence testifies to his extraordinary personal qualities and political skill. Education in excellence, the shaping of a mind. Pericles received the finest education available in the Greek world, an education that shaped not just his intellect, but his entire approach to leadership and politics. Ancient sources tell us that he studied under some of the most brilliant minds of the age. Anaxagoras of Clazomenae, circa 500–428 BCE. This relationship was perhaps the most influential in Pericles' intellectual development. Anaxagoras was one of the first philosophers to settle in Athens, bringing with him the rationalist, scientific spirit of Ionian natural philosophy. Anaxagoras taught revolutionary ideas, that the sun was not a god, but a red-hot stone larger than the Peloponnese, that the moon reflected the sun's light rather than generating its own, that eclipses had natural causes that could be predicted and explained, that nous, mind or intelligence, was the organizing principle of the cosmos, that natural phenomena could be understood through reason rather than mythology. For Pericles, studying under Anaxagoras meant learning to think critically, to question traditional explanations, to seek rational understanding of complex phenomena, skills invaluable for a statesman. More importantly, Anaxagoras taught that human intelligence, properly applied, could comprehend and shape the world. This philosophical optimism about human potential would undergird Pericles' democratic vision. The relationship between Pericles and Anaxagoras was so close that when the philosopher was prosecuted for impiety around 437 BCE, his astronomical theories were deemed blasphemous by religious conservatives. Pericles personally defended him in court, risking his own political position to protect his teacher. Though Anaxagoras was eventually forced to leave Athens, the incident demonstrated Pericles' loyalty and his conviction that intellectual freedom was essential to Athens' greatness. Damon of Oe. Damon was a music theorist and sophist who taught Pericles about the relationship between music, ethics, and politics. This might seem an esoteric subject, but in Greek thought, music was deeply connected to education. Musique encompassed all arts governed by the muses' music, poetry, dance, philosophy. Damon taught that different musical modes and rhythms affected character and behavior, and that a well-ordered state required attention to cultural education. From Damon, Pericles learned that politics wasn't only about laws and institutions, but also about culture, about shaping citizens' characters through education, art, and public culture. This understanding would inform his later cultural policies, including the massive public building program that adorned Athens with temples and theaters. Zeno of Elea. Zeno, famous for his paradoxes challenging common-sense notions of motion and multiplicity, taught Pericles the art of dialectical argument, the ability to defend a position against all objections through logical reasoning. Plutarch, writing in the 1st century CE, but drawing on earlier sources, specifically credits Zeno with teaching Pericles the art of refuting opponents' arguments by counter-questions, a skill that would make Pericles formidable in the assembly. Early political career, learning the game, 472–462 BCE. Pericles entered politics during one of the most dynamic periods in Athenian history. Athens had just emerged victorious from the Persian Wars, 490–479 BCE, had founded the Delian League, 478 BCE, as an anti-Persian alliance that was gradually transforming into an Athenian empire, and was experiencing rapid democratic development under leaders like Themistocles and Ephialtes. The theatrical debut, 472 BCE, Pericles' first recorded public act, came in 472 BCE, when, at age 23, he served as chorago, or sponsor, for Aeschylus's tragedy, The Persians. This might seem a minor role wealthy citizens regularly sponsored dramatic productions as a form of public service, liturgy. But it was significant in several ways. First, it required substantial wealth, demonstrating Pericles' family's economic status. The choragos paid for training the chorus, providing costumes and masks, and all production costs, a considerable expense. Second, The Persians was politically charged. It was the only surviving Greek tragedy based on recent historical events rather than mythology. It dramatized the Persian defeat at Salamis in 480 BCE, where Xanthippus, Pericles' father, had fought. By sponsoring this play, Pericles was associating himself with Athens' greatest military triumph and his family's role in it. Third, the play's themes resonated with Pericles' developing political philosophy. Aeschylus portrayed the Persian defeat as resulting from hybris, the arrogance of attempting to exceed proper human limits. The play suggested that moderation, respect for law, and civic solidarity, Greek virtues, would always triumph over autocratic power and imperial overreach. These themes, the superiority of free citizens over subjects of despotism, would echo throughout Pericles' later speeches. Alliance with Ephialtes, 465–462 BCE. The defining political relationship of Pericles' early career was his alliance with Ephialtes, a radical democrat who led the movement to strip the Areopagus Council of its remaining political powers. The Areopagus, composed of ex-archons, former chief magistrates, serving for life, was Athens' most aristocratic institution, a bastion of conservative authority that could block democratic legislation. The conflict came to a head in 462 BCE. Ephialtes, with Pericles as his key supporter, prosecuted corrupt Areopagus members and then proposed radical reforms. The Ephialtic reforms, 462 BCE. These reforms transferred most of the Areopagus's powers to more democratic institutions. Judicial powers went to the popular law courts, dicasteria, where large juries of ordinary citizens decided cases. Supervisory powers. Over magistrates went to the Council of 500 and Assembly. Political influence. Over legislation was eliminated. The Areopagus retained only jurisdiction over homicide cases and certain religious matters. This was revolutionary. It meant that the last major anti-democratic check on popular sovereignty was removed. Henceforth, the Athenian people, demos, through the assembly, council, and law courts, would exercise supreme power with no aristocratic body able to veto or substantially modify their decisions. Conservative opposition was fierce. The oligarchic party, led by Cimon, Athens' leading general and a hero of the Persian Wars, opposed the reforms as dangerously radical. The conflict became so intense that it led to civil strife. Cimon was ostracized, exiled for 10 years by popular vote, in 461 BCE, removing the conservatives' most powerful leader. The murder of Ephialtes, 461 BCE. Then, suddenly, Ephialtes was assassinated. In 461 BCE, shortly after his reforms passed, he was murdered, struck down by unknown assailants, probably conservative opponents who saw assassination as the only way to stop the democratic revolution. Ancient sources disagree on the details, but the murder was clearly political. Ephialtes' death left a power vacuum in democratic leadership. Pericles, at age 34, stepped into the breach. He became the leader of the Democratic Party, the champion of the reforms, and effectively the most influential politician in Athens, a position he would maintain for the next 3 decades. Political philosophy, democracy as a way of life. What distinguished Pericles from other politicians, even from other Democrats, was his philosophical approach to politics. He didn't see democracy as merely a procedural system for making decisions. He saw it as a complete way of life, a social and ethical system that elevated both the individual and the community. The funeral oration, 431 BCE, Pericles' democratic manifesto. Our fullest expression of Pericles' political philosophy comes from his famous funeral oration, delivered in winter 431 BCE at the public funeral for Athenian soldiers killed in the first year of the Peloponnesian War. The speech, preserved, with inevitable modifications, by the historian Thucydides, who heard it delivered, stands as perhaps the greatest statement of democratic values in ancient literature. Thucydides introduces the speech with notable praise. I have written down what Pericles said, keeping as closely as possible to the general sense of what he actually said. While scholars debate how much of the speech reflects Thucydides' own views versus Pericles' actual words, there's broad agreement that the speech captures Pericles' essential political philosophy. Democracy and equality, isonomia. Pericles began by describing Athens' unique political system. Our constitution is called a democracy because power is in the hands not of a minority, but of the whole people. When it is a question of settling private disputes, everyone is equal before the law. When it is a question of putting one person before another in positions of public responsibility, what counts is not membership of a particular class, but the actual ability which the man possesses. No one, so long as he has it in him to be of service to the state, is kept in political obscurity because of poverty. This was radical. Pericles was asserting that 1. Political equality, isonomia, meant real equality before the law, not just formal equality. Merit, not birth or wealth, should determine leadership positions. 3. Poverty must not be a barrier to political participation. 4. Ability to serve. Not social status was the criterion for office. Compare this to the reality in most Greek cities, where political rights were restricted to wealthy property owners. Aristocratic families monopolized leadership positions. The poor had no meaningful political voice. Birth and wealth determined political standing. Pericles was describing and defending a genuinely revolutionary system. Freedom and tolerance. Pericles then described Athenian social freedom. We are free and tolerant in our private lives, but in public affairs we keep to the law. This is because it commands our deep respect. We give our obedience to those whom we put in positions of authority, and we obey the laws themselves, especially those which are for the protection of the oppressed, and those unwritten laws which it is an acknowledged shame to break. Note the sophisticated understanding here. Private freedom. Athenians could live as they pleased, without the oppressive social control found in militaristic Sparta. Public discipline, yet they obeyed laws because of respect, not fear, protection of the weak. Laws specifically protected the oppressed, a remarkable acknowledgement of law's protective function. Unwritten laws. Ethical principles beyond formal legislation commanded respect. This balance between freedom and law, between individual liberty and civic responsibility, was central to Pericles' vision. True freedom didn't mean lawlessness, but rather living under laws one had helped create and voluntarily accepted. Open society and confidence. Pericles celebrated Athens' openness. Our city is open to the world, and we never expel a foreigner or prevent him from seeing or learning anything of which the secret, if revealed to an enemy, might profit him. We rely not upon management or trickery, but upon our own hearts and hands. This was a direct contrast to Sparta, which was notoriously secretive, expelled foreigners regularly, and maintained its system through rigid social control. Pericles was arguing that openness was strength, not weakness. Confidence in citizens was better than social control. Free exchange of ideas made Athens stronger. Democracy could compete openly and win culture and refinement. Then Pericles made a remarkable claim about culture. We are lovers of the beautiful, yet simple in our tastes, and we cultivate the mind without loss of manliness. Wealth we employ not for talk and ostentation, but when there is a real use for it. To confess poverty is no disgrace with us. The true disgrace is in doing nothing to avoid it. He was arguing that cultural sophistication didn't mean effeminacy, a common aristocratic criticism of democracy. Wealth should serve practical purposes, not mere display. Poverty wasn't shameful, but passivity was. Philosophy and art made better citizens and soldiers, not worse ones. This was revolutionary, arguing that cultural and intellectual excellence strengthened rather than weakened military and civic virtue. Participatory citizenship. Pericles then made perhaps his most famous statement about civic participation. We do not say that a man who takes no interest in politics is a man who minds his own business. We say that he has no business here at all. We Athenians are able to judge at all events if we cannot originate. And instead of looking on discussion as a stumbling block in the way of action, we think it an indispensable preliminary to any wise action at all. This is stunning. Pericles was asserting political participation was mandatory, for citizens not legally, but ethically. Apolitical citizens had no place in Athens. They had no business here at all. Discussion wasn't weakness, but essential preparation for action. All citizens could judge. Political questions, even if they couldn't originate policies. Compare this to the typical Greek and modern view that politics was for specialists, that most people should focus on their private affairs. That discussion delayed necessary action. Pericles inverted these assumptions, arguing that universal participation and thorough debate were Athens' strengths, not weaknesses. Athens as school of Hellas. Pericles concluded this section with his most ambitious claim. To sum up, I say that Athens is the school of Hellas, and that the individual Athenian in his own person seems to have the power of adapting himself to the most varied forms of action with the utmost versatility and grace. This is no passing boast of the moment, but truth and fact. Athens wasn't just another Greek city. It was the teacher, school, of all Greece. The Athenian citizen was the ideal type of human being, versatile, capable, graceful, able to excel in multiple domains. This wasn't arrogance, or not only arrogance. It was a philosophical claim about democracy's ability to develop human potential more fully than any other system. The strengthening of democracy, institutional reforms, 462-450 BCE. Radical innovation, pay for public service. Pericles' most revolutionary and enduring reform was introducing state pay for public service. This might seem like a technical adjustment, but it fundamentally transformed Athenian democracy from a system where only the wealthy could participate into one where even the poorest citizens could fully engage in governance. The problem of participation. Before Pericles' reforms, Athenian democracy faced a structural problem. Political participation cost time and money. Attending the assembly, serving on juries, holding public office, all required citizens to sacrifice working time without compensation. For wealthy Athenians living on income from estates worked by slaves, this was no hardship. But for the majority of citizens, small farmers, craftsmen, shopkeepers, laborers, taking a day off for politics meant a day without income, potentially threatening their family's survival. The result was that democracy, while formally open to all citizens, was practically dominated by the wealthy who could afford to participate. The assembly often couldn't achieve quorum because poor citizens had to work. Juries were composed mainly of the idle rich. Public offices went to those who could serve without pay. The solution: mistos, state pay. Pericles proposed and implemented a radical solution. The state would pay citizens for performing public duties. This reform was implemented gradually during the 450s BCE. Jury pay, established circa 453 BCE. The first and most important payment was for jury service. Initial rate, 2 obols per day. Later increased to 3 obols per day. Under Cleon after Pericles' death. Impact: jury service became economically viable for poor citizens. Why juries? Because Athens' judicial system required enormous citizen participation. Each jury, dikasterion, consisted of hundreds of jurors, often 201, 401, or 501 for important cases, selected by lot each day from a pool of 6,000 citizens who had volunteered for jury duty that year. The system required thousands of jury days annually. The economic calculation was clever. Obols was roughly half a skilled worker's daily wage. It wasn't generous. No one would choose jury service purely for income, but it was enough to make participation economically possible. It compensated for lost working time without creating perverse incentives. Council service, bouloutikon, established circa 457 BCE. The Council of 500 required intense participation. Term: 1 year of service, meeting frequency. Nearly daily, except festivals and unlucky days. Time commitment. Full time for 50 council members serving as praetones, executive committee, for 1/10 of the year. Pay was essential because council members couldn't maintain regular employment during service. The council handled complex administrative work requiring sustained attention. Without pay, only the wealthy could serve. Pay rate: approximately 5 obols per day, higher than jury pay, reflecting greater responsibility and time commitment. Archon compensation. The 9 archons, chief magistrates, also received pay, though evidence for the timing and amount is less clear. Since archons were selected by lot from candidates who passed a preliminary examination, dokimasia, pay ensured that capable but non-wealthy citizens could serve. Assembly attendance pay, post-Periclean. Interestingly, Pericles did not introduce pay for attending the assembly. This reform came later, in the early 4th century BCE. Why the omission? possibly because assembly meetings were less frequent, 40 per year, than jury service. They were shorter, usually a single morning. Pericles may have believed that attending the assembly was a duty not requiring compensation. Or perhaps he recognized that paying for assembly attendance would be prohibitively expensive. The ideological significance. Beyond the practical effects, misthos carried profound ideological meaning. It declared that democracy required economic as well as political equality. Formal equality before the law, isonomia, meant nothing if poverty prevented participation. By providing pay, Athens acknowledged that economic barriers to participation were incompatible with true democracy. It asserted that public service had value that the community should compensate. A citizen serving on a jury or council wasn't seeking personal advantage, but performing a public service deserving recognition and payment. It demonstrated democracy's commitment to including all citizens. By making participation economically viable, Athens showed that it genuinely wanted broad participation, not just formal eligibility. It shifted the balance of political power toward ordinary citizens. With pay enabling poor citizens to participate fully, the demos gained real influence, not just theoretical rights. Statesman, conservative opposition. The debate over misthos. Pericles' pay reforms generated fierce opposition from conservatives who saw them as dangerous demagogy. Criticism from oligarchic perspective. Conservative critics, whose views we know mainly from later sources like the Old Oligarch, Aristotle, and Plato, attacked misthos on multiple grounds. It makes citizens mercenary. Critics argued that citizens should serve from civic virtue, not for pay. Payment allegedly corrupted civic spirit into mercenary calculation. True citizens should be independently wealthy enough to serve without compensation. Pericles' response. Virtue shouldn't depend on wealth. Requiring wealth for participation was itself a form of corruption. The community benefited from including all citizens and should pay the costs. Is it better to have virtuous poor citizens excluded or included with compensation? It encourages idleness. Critics claimed that poor citizens would avoid work to collect jury pay. The system allegedly created a class of idle citizens living on public funds. It discouraged productive labor. Pericles' response. The pay wasn't generous enough to support idleness. Citizens performing public service weren't idle. They were working for the community. Democracy required participation. The cost was worth paying. Was it better to have an inactive citizenry or an engaged one? It gives power to the rabble. The most fundamental criticism. Democracy itself was dangerous. Giving political power to poor, uneducated citizens led to bad decisions. The mob would vote for their own narrow interests rather than the common good. Democracy would degenerate into mob rule. Pericles' response. Experience proved that ordinary citizens made sound judgments. Collective wisdom often exceeded individual expertise. The people had a stake in good governance and would act responsibly. Excluding the majority was tyranny, not wisdom. It's fiscally irresponsible. Paying thousands of citizens annually was expensive. The system would bankrupt Athens. Money should be spent on military preparedness, not political participation. Pericles' response. An engaged citizenry was the best defense. Athens' power derived from citizen participation, not just military hardware. The cost was sustainable, and history proved this correct. The system lasted over a century. What good was wealth if citizens couldn't govern themselves? The citizenship law of 451 BCE, democracy's boundaries, alongside expanding participation for existing citizens, Pericles also proposed restricting who could be a citizen, a law that seems paradoxical given his democratic principles, but reveals important tensions in Athenian political thought. The law. In 451-450 BCE, Pericles proposed and the assembly passed a law restricting citizenship. Previous standard. Citizenship required an Athenian father. New standard. Citizenship required both an Athenian father and an Athenian mother. This immediately excluded anyone with a foreign mother from citizenship, even if their father was Athenian. It also affected future births. Children of mixed marriages would no longer be citizens. Immediate effects. Thousands lost citizenship. Estimates suggest 4,000 to 5,000 people were removed from the citizen rolls. Mixed marriages became problematic. Athenian men married to foreign women saw their children excluded from citizenship. Value of citizenship increased. By restricting access, citizenship became more valuable and exclusive. Motivations. Why did Pericles, democracy's great champion, restrict citizenship? Several factors likely motivated the law. Economic pressure. As Athens' power and wealth grew, citizenship became increasingly valuable. Citizens received benefits, jury and council pay, distribution of public funds, access to public land, priority in commercial disputes. More citizens meant these benefits spread more thinly. The law reduced the citizen body, concentrating benefits among fewer people. Imperial wealth. Athens controlled the Delian League, receiving tribute from hundreds of allied subject cities. This wealth flowed to Athenian citizens through various mechanisms. Restricting citizenship meant fewer people sharing imperial profits. The law essentially made the citizen body into an exclusive club, monopolizing imperial benefits. Political control. A smaller, more homogeneous citizen body was easier to manage politically. Excluding those with foreign mothers removed people with divided loyalties. It strengthened the political power of pure Athenian families. Social pressure. Elite Athenian families wanted to maintain their status. They resented successful metics, resident foreigners, and their descendants. The law appeased aristocratic concerns about democratic dilution of Athenian identity. The irony. The citizenship law reveals a fundamental tension in Athenian democracy. Internally. Athens practiced radical equality and inclusion among citizens. Externally. Athens practiced radical exclusion, defining citizenship narrowly and protecting it jealously. Athens was simultaneously the most democratic society in the Greek world for citizens, one of the most exclusive societies in defining who could be a citizen. This wasn't hypocrisy so much as a structural feature of Greek political thought. Democracy applied to the politeia, citizen body, not to all residents. The rights of citizens were maximized precisely by limiting who could be a citizen. Personal irony. The citizenship law would later affect Pericles personally. His long-term partner Aspasia was from Miletus, a Greek city in Asia Minor, making her a foreigner. Their son, Pericles the Younger, was thus not an Athenian citizen under his father's own law. Only after Pericles' legitimate sons by his Athenian wife died in the plague did the assembly grant special exemption, allowing Pericles the Younger to become a citizen, a rare honor that highlighted the law's severity. The revolution of consciousness, democracy as a complete way of life. Beyond institutions, a new vision of human possibility. What truly made Pericles revolutionary wasn't just his institutional reforms, important as they were, but his articulation of democracy as a comprehensive philosophy of life. He wasn't simply changing governmental procedures. He was proposing a radical reimagining of human potential, social organization, and the good life. Traditional Greek values. Before Athens' democratic flowering, Greek society generally valued aristocratic excellence, arete. Virtue was associated with noble birth, heroic individualism. The greatest good was individual glory, as celebrated in Homer, leisure as prerequisite for excellence. Work was degrading. Only the leisured could cultivate virtue, hierarchy as natural. Society naturally divided into rulers, and ruled better and worse. Sparta as model. Many Greeks admired Sparta's militaristic discipline, social control, and oligarchic governance. Pericles' democratic counter-vision. Pericles challenged these assumptions fundamentally. Merit over birth. Excellence could emerge from any social station. A poor farmer's son could develop political wisdom, military courage, or artistic genius. Birth determined nothing about character or capability. Evidence supported this view. Many of Athens' greatest leaders came from modest backgrounds. Themistocles, architect of naval victory over Persia, wasn't from the highest aristocracy. Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides. Athens' great tragic poets included men of non-aristocratic origin. Successful generals, philosophers, artists came from diverse backgrounds. Pericles himself, despite his aristocratic birth, vindicated this principle by respecting and empowering citizens regardless of origin. Collective excellence over heroic individualism. The greatest achievement wasn't individual glory, but contributing to the community's flourishing. A citizen who served Athens faithfully, whether as a general winning battles, a juror delivering just verdicts, or a craftsman producing excellent work achieved true arete. This didn't mean suppressing individuality, but redirecting it toward communal benefit. The funeral oration celebrated fallen soldiers not as individual heroes seeking personal glory, but as citizens who sacrificed for Athens' greatness. Work as honorable. Against aristocratic disdain for labor, Pericles asserted that honest work was honorable. What was shameful wasn't poverty or working with one's hands, but being parasitic, contributing nothing, avoiding one's share of communal responsibility. This transformed Greek ethics. Instead of the aristocratic ideal of the leisured gentleman, Pericles celebrated the productive citizen, whether farmer, craftsman, merchant, or soldier, who contributed to Athens' prosperity and strength. Equality in dignity. All citizens possessed fundamental equality in human dignity. Rich and poor, educated and simple, might differ in wealth or learning, but all possessed equal worth as citizens and equal capacity to contribute to Athens' governance. This was philosophically radical. Most Greek thinkers, including Plato and Aristotle, writing after Pericles, believed in natural hierarchy, that some humans were naturally superior to others. Pericles' democratic vision insisted on fundamental equality. Freedom through law. True freedom wasn't absence of restraint, but living under laws one had helped create. The Athenian citizen was freer than the Spartan helot or Persian subject, because he obeyed laws he had voted for, not edicts imposed by masters. This sophisticated understanding of freedom as autonomy and self-governance, rather than mere license, would influence Western political philosophy profoundly. The Assembly, democracy in action. To understand how revolutionary Pericles' vision was, consider how Athenian democracy actually functioned. The ecclesia, popular assembly. Athens' sovereign body was the assembly, consisting of all adult male citizens, eventually around 30,000, 40,000 people, though only a fraction attended any given meeting. Meeting frequency. The assembly met 40 times per year. That's roughly every 8 to 9 days, excluding festivals and inauspicious days. 4 of these were sovereign assemblies, Kyria Ecclesia, with special powers. The meeting place was the Mix, a hillside in Athens that could accommodate 6,000 plus people. Decision-making process. A typical assembly meeting proceeded as follows. 1. Purification ritual. Before proceedings began, priests performed purification, katharmos, sacrificing a piglet and sprinkling its blood around the meeting space to drive away pollution and evil influences. This sacred framing reminded citizens they were performing a religious as well as political act. 2. Presentation of proposals. The Council of 500, which prepared the Assembly's agenda, presented probulumata, preliminary resolutions, for debate. These weren't binding recommendations, but starting points for discussion. 3. Open debate. Any citizen could speak by mounting the speaker's platform. Bema. The herald would ask, "Who wishes to speak? Isagoro en bouletai?" And anyone could respond. This was extraordinary. Imagine, a poor farmer could address thousands of fellow citizens, propose policies, challenge aristocrats, influence Athens' destiny. No credentials were required, only Athenian citizenship and courage to speak. Quo, voting. After debate, citizens voted by show of hands, cherotonia. The votes were counted, approximately, and the majority prevailed. For certain decisions, ostracism, naturalization, etc., secret ballot was used. Citizens wrote names on pottery shards, ostraca, to expel dangerous individuals, or voted with bronze discs for sensitive decisions. 5. Implementation. Approved measures were inscribed on stone stelae, pillars, and displayed publicly. Magistrates were responsible for implementation. The council and magistrates had no authority to modify or ignore assembly decisions. The people were absolutely sovereign.